Welcome back, witches, bitches, and family of the craft. Welcome back to Anonymous Crone, the podcast where we stir the cauldron of history and folklore and add just enough sarcasm to keep the spirits entertained. I'm the Anonymous Crone herself, and today I thought we'd talk about something fun. Not saying energy isn't fun or herb gardens aren't fun, but something just a little different. We're going to be talking about the little spirits. Not ghosts or ancestors, but the other ones. The ones who live under your floorboards, in the oldest oak tree behind your house. The ones who live beside your favorite creek or inside your garden. And maybe the ones that have been living underneath that pile of laundry that you've been pretending doesn't exist. You know the pile I'm talking about. It has achieved sentience. Now, before anyone gets nervous and starts burning sage, I'm going to say this. Whether you believe these beings are literal spirits, ancient energies, or just simple folklore that's been passed down generation after generation, they have shaped pagan belief for literally thousands of years. Every culture has them. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Celtic traditions, Norse mythology, Slavic folklore, indigenous traditions around the world, or Appalachian folk magic. Humans have always believed that we share this world with other things that we can't see. But our modern world has become so obsessed with proving things scientifically. We want measurements, evidence, pictures, DNA. They want a paper explaining why your car keys vanished from the kitchen counter, only to reappear in the refrigerator next to yesterday's leftover lasagna, because apparently that's where keys migrate. Scientists call it absent-mindedness. Witches call it, well, depends on the witch. Some will grin and say, the brownies were playing. Others will say, the house wants your attention. Some just shrug and say, Mercury must be in retrograde, which somehow has become the pagan equivalent of blaming everything on a Monday. That poor planet gets blamed for more bullshit than an oldest child. Here's the thing. Long before organized religion, people looked around at the world and saw something alive. And I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm talking literally, because the forest was alive. The river had a personality. Mountains did have moods. Certain rocks felt welcoming, others felt dangerous. And old trees demanded respect. Even houses, no, I'm going to back up. I'm going to say especially houses, were believed to possess their own consciousness. This worldview has a name, animism. Animism is not a religion. It's just a way of seeing. It's humanity's oldest spiritual perspective. The word comes from Latin anima, meaning soul or breath. The basic idea is kind of simple. Everything possesses a spirit. Not just humans or animals, but plants and trees, waterfalls, storms, fields, fire, the land itself. Even objects that were created with intention had a spirit. Animism doesn't necessarily mean every object has a personality like a human being. It's more like recognizing that everything exists in a relationship. Everything has presence. Everything participates in the web of existence. We pagans still carry that idea, whether practitioners realize it or not. We give thanks to our herbs before harvesting them, and that's animism. We ask permission before we cut a branch from a tree, when we leave offerings to the land, when we bless our homes, even when we speak kindly to our gardens. That's animism. Nature remembers those things, and our ancestors lived by that. They believed that respect was not optional. It was survival. Because imagine living 3,000 years ago. There's no electricity, no grocery stores. Every single day depended on whether nature decided to cooperate or not. The rain, the crops, animals, seasons. One bad harvest and your village wasn't posting sad emojis online. No, people died. When your entire existence depends on the natural world, you're going to develop an entirely different relationship with it. You're not going to see a forest as just lumber. You're going to see the forest as your neighbors. Powerful neighbors. Neighbors capable of feeding you or swallowing you whole. And that's where many scholars believe that these stories about the little spirits began. Not as fantasy, but as an explanation. Why did the milk spoil? Why did the cow suddenly stop giving milk? Why did one field flourish and the other one fail? Today, we'd probably blame bacteria or the weather or soil chemistry or user error. But back then, maybe the house spirit had been offended. Maybe the land spirit was unhappy, or maybe someone forgot the proper offering. Now, does that mean that's true? Who knows, but it did shape our behavior. People became more grateful, more mindful, more respectful, and well, those are not terrible habits to cultivate anyways. But one thing that does surprise us modern pagans is that our ancestors didn't separate their spiritual world from the everyday world. There wasn't a magical time and a normal time. Everything was magical. Making bread was magical, sweeping the floor, lighting the hearth, planting the beans, and giving birth. It was all magical. Trying to keep the chickens alive through winter? Well, that required every deity, every spirit, every ancestor, and probably a stiff drink. Our ancestors did not wait for Samhain to come around before they were all of a sudden spiritual. Life itself was sacred. And that means the little spirits were not occasional visitors. They were roommates. Imagine your house had another resident. Nothing creepy, but comforting. Someone watching over the family while everybody slept. Someone making sure that the fire didn't go out. Somebody protecting the children. Someone that's just quietly helping. That's where house spirits enter our story. Almost every European culture had one. Scotland had brownies. England had hobs. Germany had kobolds. Slavic countries had the domovoi. Scandinavia had Tamta, and Norway had Nisa. Ancient Rome had household guardians called lares. Lithuania had kaukai. Even Greece had stories of protective household spirits connected with Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Different names, different personalities, same basic idea though. Someone unseen, living alongside you. People who never even met each other, are separated by oceans and language barriers, yet somehow they all imagine tiny household guardians. Now, if Hollywood has taught us anything, it's that it's full of shit, especially about fairies and other household spirits. According to Disney, every magical being sparkles, sings, and solves emotional problems with adorable little woodland creatures. Folklore said that's asinine. Some little spirits are delightful, but some are pretty cranky, and some are downright terrifying. Think less Tinkerbell and more like a tiny old landlord who judges your housekeeping skills. Which might explain why my great aunt used to always insist on keeping the kitchen clean before bed. She'd say, "You don't leave yesterday's mess for tomorrow." At the time, I just thought it was a great idea, and maybe she was just a little old-fashioned, but somewhere deep in the Appalachian folk traditions lingered an older belief. A clean home welcomed blessings. A neglected one, well, maybe something else moved in. Folklore has a funny way of surviving. Sometimes it loses its explanation, but it keeps the habit. Like, why do people knock on wood? Why throw spilt salt over your shoulder? Why avoid whistling at night in some cultures? Why leave the last bite of food? Sometimes we're practicing tiny fragments of beliefs so ancient that we've forgotten why we even do them. They're like cultural fossils, little breadcrumbs leading back toward animism, toward the unseen world. Whether you believe in the literal spirits or just simply appreciate the symbolism, there's something undeniably sacred about treating your home as if it were alive. And if there's one lesson that the old ways keep whispering through centuries of folklore, it's this. Respect the world around you. Not because you're afraid, but because relationship creates magic. And speaking of relationships, wait until you meet the Brownies. These little hairy housekeepers make today's robotic vacuum cleaners look positively lazy. They'll clean your house, mend your clothes, and protect your family. But I pity the fool who tries to pay them in cash or buys them a tiny sweater. Trust me, that never ends well. But hey, Crone, do you actually believe in them? I mean, I've read the Spiderwick Chronicles. I think they're amazing. The book is fabulous, and I really did love the movie. I mean, Thimbletack is kind of a dick at first, but I loved him. But do I believe in them? I believe that for thousands upon thousands of years, people all over this world have experienced things that they cannot explain. They gave those experiences different names, different faces, different stories, but the heart of them remained exactly the same, or pretty close to it. Human beings keep telling the same kind of stories, and that doesn't automatically prove that, the little spirits exist. but it certainly makes me pay attention. As witches, we are comfortable sitting with mystery. Sometimes the most honest answer is, I don't know, but I find it fascinating. And actually, the older I get, the less interested I become in arguing over whether every spirit is objectively real. What interests me is what believing in them does to us all. Because believing your home has a spirit changes how you treat your home. Believing the forest has guardians changes how you walk through the woods. Believing a river is alive changes how willing you are to pollute it. Believing that the land remembers changes how carefully you tread upon it. You become more respectful, more grateful, more connected, and I think our world could use a little bit more of all three of those. You know, sometimes I sit there and my brain does some weird shit and I picture little funny things. And one of those is, I wonder, what would it be like if a brownie met a Roomba? Would the brownie ride it like a lawnmower? Would they think it was some terrifying iron beast from another realm? Or would they just simply shake their tiny little head and say, dang, humans really will invent anything to avoid sweeping? Because us humans have been trying to get out of our chores since the invention of chores. And, well, that's exactly where brownies come into our story today. And if you've never heard of a brownie, that's okay. The brownie of Scottish folklore is one of the best-loved house spirits in Europe. They're said to be small, wrinkly, shaggy little beings that came out after everyone else went to bed. They preferred the quiet hours, where humans were not around to make a mess of things. And according to countless old tales, they'd just go to work. They would sweep the floor, churn the butter, feed the livestock. They would polish your boots, repair broken tools, straighten up the house. Basically everything you hoped your teenagers might eventually learn to do. But imagine waking up every morning and the dishes are done. Bitch, I'd be leaving cream out every single night. Forget manifestation journals. I'm manifesting dishwashing elves. The earliest written stories about brownies began appearing in medieval Scotland, but historians believe that tradition is much older. Like so much folklore, it was passed from mouth to mouth, around fires long before anyone bothered to write anything down. Another thing that's cool about the brownies, besides their act of kindness, is that brownies weren't considered servants. They were not slaves. They chose to help. The relationship was built on mutual respect. The family appreciated the brownie. The brownie appreciated just being appreciated. That sounds suspiciously like the healthiest relationship ever. And another thing, brownies expected almost nothing. Just a little kindness. A clean hearth, maybe a bowl of cream, maybe fresh bread, maybe some honey. Nothing extravagant. Now there were rules. Rule number 1, never watch a brownie work. Apparently they're very shy creatures. If they realized that someone was spying on them, they would disappear immediately. Now I don't know about you, but if I spent all night cleaning someone else's house and they stood there critiquing my vacuum lines, bitch, I'd be out of there too. Fair enough. Rule number 2, never brag about your brownie. You didn't talk about it with your neighbors. You didn't boast. You didn't try to profit from their presence. Humility was part of the agreement. The moment that pride entered the relationship, the brownie left. That's one thing worth thinking about. How many spiritual traditions warn against ego? Pretty much all of them. Okay, rule number 3, never pay them. And this one confused me for a while. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. Because you think they'd appreciate money or gifts, but it turns out they don't. Many stories tell of families trying to reward their brownies with coins. The brownie became deeply offended. Some traditions say that accepting wages implied that they were servants rather than respected companions. Others just believe money corrupted the relationship. Instead, they would leave cream, bread, honey, oats, a warm place near the fire. Simple hospitality. And that was enough. And rule number 4 just might be my favorite. Never give a brownie clothes. Now, if you've read Harry Potter, you might remember the house elves. They're free when you give them clothing.
Master has presented Dobby with clothes. Dobby is free.
That idea actually echoes older folklore. In many brownie tales, gifting clothes signals the end of the relationship. Sometimes the brownie feels insulted. Sometimes they interpret it as dismissal. Sometimes they just become so embarrassed that they leave forever. One Scottish story tells of a brownie receiving a very tiny little cloak. He looked at it, laughed, thanked the family, and then vanished forever. Another ending to that says he sang a little rhyme about finally being too fancy for farm work before dancing away into the hills. And I think that's very iconic behavior. Tiny magical drama queen. And I support that. But not every brownie was sweet. Some were pretty freaking grumpy. Some played tricks. They would hide your knitting needles. They'd move your shoes, tangle horse manes, scatter flour around the house, misplaced tools. Maybe they weren't brownies. Maybe that's just middle age misplacing your things. Still, these stories gave people a playful explanation for life's little mysteries. Every culture seemed to invent someone to blame besides themselves. So let's travel south into Germany, where brownies have a rougher cousin, the kobold. Now, kobolds have had a serious image problem thanks to the fantasy games. Forget the tiny reptilian monsters. Traditional kobolds were household spirits. Sometimes miners' spirits. Sometimes ship spirits. Sometimes protectors. Sometimes absolute little gremlins. Yeah, they could help. They could also hinder. Entirely depended on how you treated them. One German legend tells of a kobold faithfully protecting a household for generations. Another tells of one making so much noise every night that nobody could sleep because the family became lazy and disrespectful. And you notice the pattern, right? Respect. Again, again, and again. Respect determines the relationship. Then we wander into Slavic lands to meet one of my favorites, the domovoi. And I absolutely love the domovoi. Picture a tiny old grandfather, long beard, hairy, usually barefoot, living somewhere near the stove or the hearth, just watching everything, absolutely everything. The domovoi wasn't merely protecting the house. He represented continuity, family, home, ancestors. Many believe that every family had one. Some traditions even suggested that the first ancestor of the household became its guardian spirit. When families moved, guess what? They invited the domovoi to come too. There were actual traditions. People carried embers from the old hearth into the new house while inviting their household guardian to follow. And think about what that symbolizes. You're not just moving furniture. You're carrying the soul of your home. Today, we move with moving trucks and bubble wrap. And back then, they moved with blessings. Now, the domovoi had standards. If the family argued constantly, he became very unhappy. If the people neglected the home, he might start making strange noises. If somebody dangerous approached, he was said to warn the household. Some legends say that he would tug blankets. Others claimed he appeared in dreams. Some said pets could see him, which immediately explains why your cat stares in empty corners at 3 a.m. like it's watching a soap opera. Cats know things, or they're just completely insane. Whatever. Actually, both can be true. And speaking of cats, almost every culture believed animals perceived the spirit world better than humans. Dogs bark at nothing, cats following invisible movement, horses refusing certain paths, birds behaving strangely. Whether you interpret that spiritually or biologically, it's remarkable how widespread that belief is. Time to head north to Scandinavia. Meet the Tomta. These little fellows are pretty happy. Imagine a tiny elderly farmer. Big beard, built like someone who spent 200 years hauling hay. The Tomta guarded farms, animals, children, barns. They worked hard. They expected very little, but do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not forget their Christmas porridge. Every Scandinavian child grows up hearing the same version of the story. Leave the Tomta a bowl of porridge with butter on Christmas Eve. Did you forget the butter? Well, he'll probably forgive you for that. But forget the porridge entirely? Well, hope you weren't particularly attached to orderly barns. There are stories of livestock mysteriously escaping, tools breaking, milk spoiling, animals refusing to cooperate. Was it actually supernatural? Maybe. But leaving porridge once a year also created a beautiful tradition of gratitude. Even if nobody believed literally anymore, that kindness remained. Folklore has a way of preserving good habits long after beliefs have changed. Sometimes the magic isn't in proving spirits exist. Sometimes the magic is remembering just to say thank you. Because gratitude changes us, whether anyone invisible is listening or not. Now, these spirits were not worshipped, but people did respect them, and they honored them, and they lived alongside them, but they were not gods. They occupied a middle space in the old world view, more powerful than humans in some ways, yet deeply tied to everyday rhythms of life. They remind us that magic isn't always found in mountaintops or inside ancient temples. Sometimes it's the creak of an old farmhouse, the smell of fresh bread, the cat sleeping by the fire, or the strange feeling that your home somehow knows when you're hurting. And if house spirits tend the places we build, who tends the wild places we only borrow? Because once you step beyond the garden gate, past the old stone wall, and into the whispering woods, you're entering someone else's home. We're heading outside now, and according to just about every pagan tradition on earth, outside belongs to somebody. One of the biggest misconceptions that we have today is that the ancient pagans viewed nature as resources. No, that idea is modern. To our ancestors, the forest wasn't lumber. It was a living community. The river wasn't just simply water. It had moods. The mountain wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was ancient, wise, and watching. In fact, many cultures believe that every single place had its own spirit. The Romans were a great example of that. They were incredibly practical people, but they were also deeply spiritual. Before building homes, temples, roads, or entire towns, they often acknowledged the spirit that was already living there. They believed that if you wanted to thrive in a place, you first had to introduce yourself. Can you imagine that today, though? Instead of bulldozing a forest, the foreman steps out of the bulldozer and says, "Excuse me, we like to build a Starbucks here. Is anybody using this tree?" Because here's the thing. Modern paganism often speaks of honoring the earth. Ancient paganism expected you to have manners, and those aren't exactly the same thing. You didn't march into a sacred place acting like you owned them. You arrived humbly. You asked permission. You left things better than when you found them. Funny how our grandparents called that common courtesy. We now just call it environmentalism. The Norse had a similar concept. They believed in landvantar, land whites. These were spirits connected to specific pieces of land. Some protected farms, others watched over mountains. Some guarded coastlines. And Iceland still takes these traditions very serious. In fact, there have been stories over the years of roads being rerouted because the local people believed that they would disturb places associated with hidden folk or land spirits. Now, whether those decisions were made from literal belief, cultural respect, or simply honoring heritage is beside the point. The point is, some cultures never completely forgot. Then we have the Celtic traditions. Now, if there's one thing the Celts excelled at, besides creating myths that can twist your brain into a Celtic knot, it was understanding sacred landscapes. To them, certain places, the veil is very thin, where the ordinary and the otherworld seem to brush against one another. In old wells, ancient standing stones, hilltops, crossroads, misty lakes, sacred groves. You know the feeling. Most of us has experienced it at least once. You step into a place, and immediately, everything changes. The air feels heavier, quieter. Time seems to slow down. You instinctively lower your voice. I've been to places like that. Places where you suddenly realize you aren't the loudest thing in the landscape anymore. Now, are you literally sensing another being? Maybe you finally become quiet enough to notice the intelligence already woven throughout nature. We ask, "May I have this bone, or this rock, or this plant?" And we wait until we feel that answer. Indigenous traditions across North America often emphasize offering tobacco, cornmeal, songs, or prayer before taking anything. Many Celtic reconstructionists pour fresh water onto the roots of sacred trees. Norse practitioners often leave grains or ale for the landvantar. Modern Druids often leave biodegradable offerings while cleaning litter from sacred places. The offering isn't payment, it's reciprocity. That's a huge difference. The earth owes us nothing. We owe it everything. Which brings us to offerings. This is where social media has confused everybody. Apparently, every third video online suggests spirit demands expensive crystals, imported incense blessed by the Himalayan monks, moon water collected while Mercury sneezed in retrograde, and candles costing more than my first car. But let me just say something. To my sisters and brothers and other close kin, our ancestors were poor. They were very, very poor. Most offerings were just incredibly simple. Fresh water, milk, bread, honey, ale, butter, oats, fresh herbs or wildflowers, seasonal fruit, sometimes just a heartfelt prayer, sometimes removing trash from a forest, repairing a trail, planting a tree. Those are all offerings. One caution I do want to mention, and this is where old folklore and modern environmental awareness can both shake hands. It's to be mindful of what you leave behind. While stories often mention of leaving milk or bread or honey, those can attract wildlife or be harmful in some environments. In today's practice, one of the kindest offerings that you can make is something that leaves no trace. Picking up litter before you leave. That's caring for the land, and that is a sacred act. Because here's the secret that our ancestors seem to understand. The spirits of a place don't just notice what you give them, they notice how you behave. Have you ever experienced something in your own home or your garden or out there in nature that made you stop and wonder if something or someone was quietly sharing space with you? Whether it was comforting, mischievous, impossible to explain, or just simply one of those moments that gave you goosebumps. Send me your story. You never know, it might find its way in a future episode of Anonymous Crone. All right. Now, I didn't get to everything I wanted to cover on this episode. If I did, this episode would have been like an hour and a half long. So I touched on a few things. If you found something that piqued your interest, you have Google. Do a deep dive. It's very, very interesting. Also, this topic really isn't talked about a whole lot. I know it's going to come as a shock, but I didn't get any questions in my inbox about brownies. So what I did is I ran to Reddit for tonight's question. So I found a question about brownies, and the username is The Green Alchemist. And here's what The Green Alchemist wrote on Reddit. What is the deal with brownies and other household spirits? Who is actually doing the labor attributed to these creatures? Brownies are an old Scottish folklore that are supposedly little spirits that do basic chores like sweeping the floor and mending shoes. Apparently, these were widely believed in, and people would pour beer or milk on a little altar to them as payment for their work. There are cognates all over Europe. The story of the cobbler and the elves comes from the same notion. Call me a closed-minded modernist, but these seem quite fishy to me. I don't think anyone's shoes ever magically got mended by pouring beer on a rock. But how could this notion have developed? Either a shoe gets mended or it doesn't, and the difference is obvious. If someone thinks a brownie fixed it, clearly something fixed it. What rational explanation is there for this belief? Again, that is a question from Reddit from The Green Alchemist. And it's a really good question because on the surface, the whole thing does sound a little suspicious. And our modern friend says, quite reasonably, hold on, nobody's shoes got magically repaired because they poured beer on a rock. Someone had to fix the damn shoe. The people who believed in brownies weren't necessarily incapable of recognizing cause and effect. They knew the shoes needed stitching. They knew the floors didn't magically sweep themselves. The brownie was often the explanation for the unseen household labor. Imagine a household hundreds of years ago. Someone gets up early and sweeps the floor. Someone repairs a shoe after everyone is long gone to bed. A child quietly finishes up their chore. A family member does something without announcing it. And then the next morning, the brownie must have done it. And sometimes, frankly, it probably was another person, but there's another piece to this. Humans have an enormous tendency to give personality to things that we don't understand. If something happens and we don't know what caused it, our brains naturally look for an agent. And if your culture already believes in spirits and fairies and ancestors and household beings, then someone did it can very easily become a spirit did it. And then you leave out a bowl of milk. The milk disappears, and now you have confirmation. Of course, it might have been the cat, or a child, or someone sneaking up for a midnight snack. But once you believe the brownie accepted your offering, the relationship becomes real within the culture. And that's very important because brownies were not treated like magical servants. You take care of the household spirit, and the spirit takes care of the household. You don't boss it around, you don't insult it, you don't necessarily even thank it too enthusiastically, because apparently even supernatural housekeepers have boundaries. The brownie may have represented something that people understood but didn't always recognize. The invisible labor that keeps a household running. Someone cleaned it, someone cooked, someone mended, someone cared for the animals, and someone always made sure that people had what they need. And much of that work was very repetitive, thankless, and largely invisible. So maybe turning that labor into a little household spirit made it easier to understand. Maybe we don't have to decide whether brownies literally exist before we can appreciate the story, because the brownie represents an old idea that the home is more than four walls and furniture. The home has a spirit. It has energy. It has relationships with the family that lives there, and it requires care. And when you leave an offering for a household spirit, you're essentially saying this: I recognize that this place gives something to me, and I give something back. Because folklore isn't always about proving that something physically happened. Sometimes it's about explaining why something mattered. And maybe that's the real magic of the brownie. Not that a tiny creature secretly sweeping your floor, but that somebody, somewhere, believed the work of caring for the home deserved to be noticed. And I think that is a bit of magic that I can get behind. So there's no guest spot for this episode tonight. So there's not going to be a guest spot on this episode just this time. The topic on this one was just a little bit different, and I couldn't actually find a brownie expert to talk on their behalf. So I decided that we don't really need a guest spot for this one. This was just a fun episode to broaden your horizons and maybe give a little bit more thanks for things unseen. So thank you for your time and your faith in Mother Earth. And I know there are things that I, and probably no one else, can explain with absolute certainty. But if you stuck around this long with this old crone and heard my point of view, I encourage you to look beyond the mundane, find the obscure, and seek answers that feel right to you. If you have any questions or something you'd like to share, please email me at acronepodcast@gmail.com. And as always, I'm going to leave you with a crone's blessing. May hearth spirits guard your home each night, and brownies keep your little world just right. May land spirits greet you where wild things grow, and ancient ones whisper the wisdom you need to know. May you give thanks for the unseen and small, for the spirits that dwell in the hearth, field, and wall. And may your home be blessed, your wild places free, with kindness between the spirits and thee. Thank you for wandering the old paths with me today, my friends. Until next time, keep your heart open and your mind not closed to the other realm. This world is far more enchanted when you treat it like an old friend rather than something you own. Merry meet, merry part, merry meet again. See you next week here at Anonymous Crone.